Welcome to the Evolution of Behavior Theory presentation for Leader Behavior Theory. I am Dr. Jason White, the instructor for this course. Psychology itself is not an old science and is roughly about 100 years old. The purpose of studying psychology is to answer the question, why do people do what they do? This question was primarily answered by philosophers, until psychology became a formal field of study. One of the most prominent and relevant philosophers is ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle, who noted basic rules of association. When two events or stimuli occur enough times together, one, by itself, may generate, as an example, emotion, a mental picture, or response, that the other event or stimulus might do by itself or together with the other stimulus. French philosopher René Descartes stood apart from other philosophers in the early 1600s, for noting the influence the environment had on behavior. Descartes did not believe the environment was entirely responsible for behavior. Instead, believing that individuals had both voluntary and involuntary control over their own behavior. He also believed all individuals were born with basic ideas, such as a concept of God, and concepts of logic. In the late 1600s, John Locke, a British philosopher and ethicist, disagreed that people were born with basic ideas and instead articulated that individuals start collecting behavior-shaping experiences from the moment they are born. Thomas Hobbes, another British philosopher, in the late 1600s, also disagreed with Descartes. He believed behavior was a result of either pleasure or avoidance of pain. While Aristotle seemed to be able to discuss the influence of the environment over behavior in terms of association, Descartes introduced the idea that the environment can influence voluntary and involuntary behavior. These ideas had a tremendous influence on Charles Darwin in terms of adaptation and natural selection. It should be noted that natural selection is the process by which the environment supports mutations in organisms for subsequent generations. This sometimes leads to new species. Darwinism has nothing to do with survival of the fittest, as commonly misunderstood, especially in social media. Survival of the fittest is a philosophy that was introduced before Darwin's, by Herbert Spencer, which stated that organisms that do not adapt to the environment do not survive, and in some cases extinction occurs. To be clear, natural selection is the scientifically accepted theory, and survival of the fittest is not. Unfortunately, none of the ideas, up to this point in history, had been verified through experimental analysis. A challenge for the field of psychology, up until the early 1900s, was scientific study generally focused on the mind and unobservable behavior, in conjunction with the environment. Wundt's solution to this dilemma was to identify observable components of consciousness. He established the first psychology laboratory at the University of Leipzig, Germany, in 1879, to train students to observe and measure behavior. Wundt taught students how to use the scientific method to present stimuli and measure response times, with specifically designed apparatuses. The largest and most obvious criticism regarding Wundt's study of consciousness was that it was impossible to interpret experiences in the mind with any sort of accuracy. William James, thought to be the first American psychologist, in the early 1800s, did not see the field of psychology the way Wundt did. He was influenced by Charles Darwin's theories on natural selection and adaptation. He believed that psychology should also focus on the function of behavior, relative to the mind, as it occurred in a specific environment. In the early 1900s, two major concepts emerged: classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Classical conditioning was first introduced by Ivan Pavlov in animals, and later by John Watson in humans. In 1913, Watson noted psychology should be about observable behavior, and in 1920, demonstrated classical conditioning in humans. He demonstrated that autonomic responses, such as fear, can be brought under stimulus control. Interestingly, he also demonstrated, as Aristotle noted, that similar stimuli can have the same effects as the original stimulus that created the autonomic response. Though Watson is considered the father of behaviorism, B.F. Skinner really defined the field, to include establishing scientific journals. Skinner demonstrated that behavior is the result of a basic three-term contingency and wrote about it extensively. Antecedents let an organism know that if a behavior occurs, there will be a reward. And the consequence, or what happens after the behavior, either maintains it or reduces it. The field of behavioral psychology can be broken down into three parts. Behaviorism is the philosophy of behavior analysis. Experimental analysis is sometimes thought of as rats and pigeons research, which focuses on the clinically controlled environment to test basic principles of behavior. And applied behavior analysis is the experimental application of behavior analysis principles to solve socially critical issues. To summarize, Prominent leadership theories that purport to be based in behavior are not based in behavior as a science of observable behavior. Most theories discuss the relationship between constructs. As leaders, we have a duty to our role. That concludes this presentation. Thank you for watching.